I am Jimbo Paris, and you are listening to The Jimbo Paris Show. All right, how's it going, everyone? This is Jimbo Paris. Welcome to The Jimbo Paris Show. And today we have Dr. Jacqueline Kerr, CEO of Me to We Moms, and additionally, she's a well-known keynote speaker for women around the world. Let's see what she has to say.
Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon.
Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
Lovely, lovely. So, first of all, let's learn a bit about you. So what do you specifically do?
Well, a little bit that's interesting is actually how I got to this place now at this moment in time. So I was a professor at the University of California, San Diego. I was a leader in my field. I'm actually in the top 1% of most cited scientists worldwide. And I helped communities become healthier. I worked with schools, workplaces, neighborhoods, care facilities, retirement communities. And unfortunately, in that process of being a leader in my field and just working so hard, that was my work ethic, work harder, work harder, work harder. And as I became a mom and my son was diagnosed on the autism spectrum, I found trying to cope in both places became really challenging. So I ended actually burning out and not even really knowing it at the time. So after that process, and once I started to recover and understand what I went through and understand really the relationship between being a mom, a working mom, and burning out, I really wanted to say, I don't want other people to have to go through this process, especially moms.
Now, I know this may be very difficult for you to discuss, but what were your personal experiences with burnout? What is burnout?
Right. So burnout has been studied for years, and the Maslach's burnout index defines it as fatigue, exhaustion, really overwhelm, and cynicism when you start to see your employees or the people you're caring for as no longer humans. And then you really also become very ineffective. You might still be as productive, but you're spending so many more hours doing it. And then lots of other people describe it as being having brain fog. For me, particularly, I was like what they describe as tired but wired. You're so passionate about your work and you're so committed to it, but you can't switch it off. Resentment is also another very early signal of burnout that people can think about. So resentment and rumination. But actually, my experience, Jimbo, was really hard as a mum to go through, particularly. And I know this is hard for people to hear, but essentially I experienced suicide ideation. So I remember one evening I had got into a fight with my husband because he'd actually taken my daughter to the pediatrician for the first time on his own. And he was so proud of that. And he came home and I wasn't able to say thank you for that because I'd been in a work meeting. I was making dinner. No one ever thanked me for everything I did. And he just, refused to accept that and said, look, it's not my fault you no longer have friends or hobbies. And it was such a cut to the heart, but so true. And that night, I just really felt like I couldn't face it anymore. I was crying on the way to work. I was crying on the way home because I was feeling stress in both places. And so I wrote a letter to my kids saying, please be kind to yourself. Please spend time in nature. Please ask for help. And I'm sorry that I couldn't. And it was when I then read that back to myself, I realized, okay, why? Why can't you ask for help? Why aren't you asking for help? What does that mean? So from that point, I really realized that, I needed to do something. I was in such a bad place. I really wanted to escape. So, I did actually at that point take a leave of absence from my work and go into counseling. So I was very privileged and lucky to do that. But the issue was when I then went back to work, I had actually reset my fight-flight system that was in high alert. Everything was just such a stress and a danger. I had the whole world on my shoulders. And when I then went back to work and I was calmer, the stress of work hit me again like a truck. And actually, I'd never experienced stress before because I had always managed to mitigate it with exercise. And I think it's like being the frog in boiling water. We don't feel the temperature rising, so we don't realize the effect that stress has on us. So that was a really tough time. And I then decided, then I experienced all the cynicism and thinking, what am I doing in this public health amazing job, but we're having no impact in the world. So I ended up leaving that and then starting to work for myself, which has its own burnout challenges. But my husband really encourages me to speak about this because I definitely want people to realize you don't have to be at the point of wanting to escape to be in burnout. Burnout starts way, way earlier. For example, there's 12 stages of burnout. And the first stage is the need to prove yourself. And I think so many of us come from that space, maybe through culturally or socially or through our families, but then also through the experiences we have in life. Mums are considered uncommitted to their jobs because they're committed to their families, whereas dads are considered committed to their jobs because they're committed to their families. It's the same situation and it plays out differently in the workplace. So no wonder, women and women of color feel like they're having to reprove themselves. And it is a pathway to burnout. So it's a real challenge.
Okay. Great explanation. And sort of, how long have you been in this industry of sort of helping women and women of color deal with burnout?
So it's really been 4 years since I left my role at the university. But essentially, as a public health behavior change scientist, the role that I was in, I was helping communities and women. I had specific research that, for example, was on women and heart disease, for example, Latina communities and heart disease. And even since leaving the university, I still help other researchers with their research. And for example, just last year, we received some funding to help a hospital and a community center collaborate to prevent the high levels of problems for women of color during childbirth and after childbirth. So those rates in the US are just extraordinarily high problems with mortality and morbidity. So maternal health has been something that has been part of my career. But specifically in the burnout, I've really been in a 4-year burnout recovery. And to be honest, I only joined social media last year. So, I had been able, from that academic perspective, was influencing the world through my research, through my publications. And suddenly I've had to step into this quite different space for me to start to try and message and communicate with women and with organizations about how to prevent burnout. And so I think there's a couple of pieces there. I have my own podcast, Overcoming Working Mom Burnout, and that's been going for a year now. And that really focuses particularly on the mum perspective, although next season I'm interviewing dads because they're such important allies in this work. But also then I did my TEDx talk, How to Stop Burnout Before It Starts. So I'm really trying to help companies think through what is the intersection between burnout and bias and how can we interrupt that, and using all my public health behavior change tools. Because again, I see a lot of people working on this from a kind of business perspective, or the perspective very much that's communicated often is self-care is the answer. And that then blames the individuals. Many individuals are looking after themselves. I was exercising every day, but you then feel like a failure. And that's the difference with public health. We come from it from this perspective of understanding the social determinants of health, which is, your race, ethnicity, your gender, your age, where you live, your education, all these things play into how we experience health and how we experience the health care system. And for example, when physicians are more burned out, they treat patients with more racial bias. So it's so important that we prevent burnout because it leads to more bias. So I think really these multi-level interventions where we're saying, okay, Individuals need help. Yeah, I needed help. I needed coaching. I needed to manage my people pleasing and perfectionistic tendencies. But I also, we needed help in the family. We needed to restructure our family differently. I changed how I parented. And then in the workplace, we really need support in the workplaces for all caregivers through paid leave and subsidized childcare and transparent pay bands, and then society as a whole. I mean, I am so grateful for particularly the mothers of color and the women of color who are coming out and talking about the challenges of being a mother. Serena Williams and Alison Felix as athletes talking about how it's challenging to be a mother. And then other athletes of women of color who are saying about the mental health challenges. So we need society to change and to appreciate motherhood in a different way and to appreciate mental health in a different way. And that comes, from cultural change. And rather than having this, we have this at the moment, this ideal worker mentality, which is you're available 24/7. And then we have the ideal mother mentality, which is you're available 24/7. So when that collides for working moms, it's a real challenge.
Well, I'm learning a lot too. I didn't know affected racial bias. That's interesting.
Yeah, that was so surprising to me to read. And that's why I followed up and read the original article on physicians, because I was like, wow, this makes sense, but I hadn't seen it in the data before. And essentially, if we think about our stereotypes and our unconscious or conscious biases being kind of ingrained and our primary sort of superhighway in our brain, so that mitigating bias takes additional mental effort, definitely for some groups more than others. And so if you are then exhausted, your brain doesn't have that additional mental effort. And when you're already experiencing role strain, it's very challenging. But I think the other piece that we have to recognize is that everyone, again, thinks burnout is people unable to cope with stress. But burnout comes from the conditions in the workplace and lack of autonomy, lack of reward, workplace injustice, lack of belonging. These are all things that cause burnout. And these are all things that particularly women of color are disadvantaged by in the workplace a lot more. So yes, we're definitely seeing increasing numbers in mothers and women of color who are burning out for these reasons, right? There are definitely other reasons. And this is a problem. Many of our, unfortunately, white male CEOs experience burnout, but they experience it due to overwork, and a vacation helps them. That's quite different from an experience of a mother with role strain who's not being paid equally and not getting equal promotional opportunities. That's a really different type of exhaustion and burnout from fighting the system, as opposed to, overworking because of the performance role you're in.
Excellent. And, from what I could tell, you're very intelligent and well-versed in this. How did you sort of become, a behavior change scientist? And what is that?
Thanks for asking that question. So I suppose even when I was little, I wanted to change the world. And I remember my family moved around a lot due to my dad's job. So I ended up in boarding school in the UK. And one year we had an election in the country in England for the prime minister. And they said at school, do you want to have an election at school and see who would become prime minister for the day? So lots of the kids represented the typical political parties. And I represented a totally different party. I said, if we're going to have prime minister for today, I want to have it as a no school rules day. So I wanted to change the system and be a change maker from when I was about 10 years old. And so my first job out of university was actually in advertising, and we did some advertising for the local zoo. And I really appreciated how we could help with supporting endangered species. I also did some advertising for pharmaceutical companies and realized, wow, they have so much power. So when I then went and said, I want to use this skill of communicating and messaging and persuading people but for good. So that's when I took the path of actually doing a master's in health and exercise science, got hooked by research because it's like a puzzle, constant questions. I then did a PhD in health promotion and health psychology, and then went on to do my own research. So yeah, I mean, it was a 20-year career, a long process. And what I love about the behavior change side of things is all the research that I did randomized clinical trials. And the only way we're actually seeing success is if we make change. So that was the absolute level for us to say change has to happen for us to understand that what we've done has been a successful behavior change tool and which strategies worked. And that's a really high bar because lots of people can stand in wanting to change for decades, you know? And so actually when change happens, and that's what you hold yourself to, because again, I feel like lots of the companies now are talking about DEI and wellness, but they're really touting it as a branding exercise. They're not being held accountable to say, well, what actually have you changed? So kind of that's what I've always held my research at that level to say it's only successful if we actually create improved health or change in behaviors. So that's really different as well in terms of what are the behaviors we have to change? Because I think a lot of people think about it as, well, you can have increased confidence. And that is definitely one of the pathways to change. But it's really about what skills do you develop and do you practice those skills every day? And change is difficult. It's really challenging. And that's why we need a lot of supports. We need to work out, okay, what sort of goal is even, you know, realistic for us to set and keeping it small and achievable. But also then what do we need to succeed? We need accountability partners. We need reminders. We need tracking so that we can actually know we're succeeding. We need celebrations when we succeed. So these are the things in workplaces as well that we have to acknowledge is change is challenging, and we have to have the right conditions for change. And those can be set up definitely with this behavior science framework. So often I work with people who are, you know, bringing a program to a company, and then I say, okay, what behaviors are you changing? And they can't answer that question because we don't think so clearly and focused around, okay, what are the actual daily behaviors that have to change? Versus, for example, we know there's so much evidence out there now, again, of so much unconscious bias training. And all that is making people aware. It hasn't given them any new skills. And skills take time to develop. You have to practice, you have to get them wrong, you have to get feedback, and you have to get ongoing reminders to keep trying. So it's not surprising to me that these sort of one-time awareness trainings are having no effect.
Okay. Now, with your career, were there any sort of notable hallmarks or accomplishments or experiences you've had?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, actually, stepping onto the TEDx stage was one of the hardest things I've done. I've been a public speaker since I was 10 years old on the political stump at school. And doing a TEDx talk, not only did it take me several months to actually prepare the talk and know exactly what it was I wanted to say, but I was sharing a very personal message. I talked about the letter that I wrote to my kids. And so stepping onto the stage to share that personal story, knowing that I was going to get emotional and wondering if I could, experience the emotion authentically, but then not lose it entirely. So it was kind of interesting before stepping onto that red circle, the amount of deep breaths I had to take to do that. It was much harder than I anticipated. So I felt so honored because I was in an event in Canada, and there were other people on the stage who had experienced extreme traumas in their life. So I felt really honored to be able to share a stage with those people and have an opportunity to share my message.
What emotions did you feel when you first stepped on that stage?
It was so interesting because I had this conversation with other people that were there. We actually traveled up to Canada during the tail end of the COVID epidemic, when we were able to start traveling. And so there had been all the stress of trying to get there, not knowing if we were actually going to get there. And I think the pressure of knowing that it was something different, that this was something we really cared about. I really cared about having the opportunity to share my message to a wider audience. So I was carrying that. I was carrying that sense of really wanting to do a good job and feeling the pressure of the moment. And then stepping onto the stage, just knowing that I was going to be sharing that very personal story with so many more people. But actually what I did, it was great because some of the people that helped mic me up that morning were young students, because this was at the McMaster University in Hamilton, outside of Toronto. And they were saying to me, "Oh, you remind me of my mom. My mom never sits down and takes a break. My mom never looks after herself. I'm really interested to hear what you're going to say." So I kind of just looked at those young students, those female students in the audience, and felt like I was doing it for them. And I hadn't expected to make that connection, because they were saying, "I want more for my mom, and I want more for myself as a mother going forward." And I really didn't expect to have that connection. So that kind of really helped me push through, because I really felt like I could talk to them and say, yeah, let's change what the expectations are, because I have a daughter and I don't want her to go through this. And I think that's so important also for us as mothers, when we think about the role models we're setting for our girls, is we don't want to be martyrs to motherhood. I mean, we don't want to be these superheroes, because that's not what we want for our daughters. We want them to have balanced life where they're valued and respected and equally. So we have to role model a life where we're not sacrificing ourselves for everybody else as well.
Excellent. And kind of backtracking a bit here, you were a public health professor at one point?
That's right. Yeah.
What were some of the notable challenges or sort of experiences you've had, and how did you kind of overcome those?
Right. So my research started when I actually came to the US in 2004 for a postdoc. It was to do an international study. So we wanted to look at communities around the world and see the differences in how communities are designed. So that was, fascinating and exciting. I had always been a global citizen before that, to be able to travel to these countries and study different neighborhoods. But sometimes we'd still come back and be in a situation where I might present to the San Diego, for example, Regional Planning Council, and still struggling for people to move away from thinking about their whole purpose as a transportation agency was to manage car traffic, and to actually put the pedestrian and the bicyclist on the stage as well. So quite often I'd be asked to evaluate their metrics of traffic, and I'd say, no, I'm not going to evaluate these at all. I want you to evaluate pedestrians. So, there was still always those challenges in some ways, no matter what, how much research you had. And I think that was actually, some of the most inspiring moments I had is I worked with older adults in particular towards the end of my career. And I ended up consulting also for the AARP on their livable communities. And to see older adults, one, improve their health and be so invested in their health, even towards the end of their lives, saying, yes, we want to move more and we want to live in healthier communities. And then seeing them, teaching them how to be advocates, and for them to go to the mayor or their local community and increase the crosswalk timing or get a crosswalk built. It was so amazing to see the power they had. And then they would do these groups that they would organize, and they were the leaders of these groups. And that's what we taught them to be. Although, to be honest, every step of the way, they were teaching me something. And to see the power in that, to see the power in the peer support, and to see the power in advocacy, Those were such inspirational moments for me. But I feel like it is still I'm still at the same place now as sometimes I was then, which is we do know what to do to improve our health at a community level, at a society level, and how to have more equitable and human workplaces. We know what to do. We also know enough about how to do it, so that how do you implement it so it's successful, right? Because again, change is hard and you need to have the right conditions for change. But we know enough about that. What's still missing is this willingness to invest in it. And so that's still the barrier that I face when I think about it, because that's really what's still part of the barrier here. And so often people say, well, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, no, we're actually way beyond that. We do know what to do. There's so much evidence out there. There's so many recommendations and models. It's really about, okay, where is the willingness to invest in your employees and the health of your community?
Excellent, excellent. And speaking of, we discussed a lot of burnout. I kind of glanced at your website a bit, and you seem to be something called a burnout survivor. Can you kind of explain what that is?
Right. Yes. And that was an interesting entrepreneurial journey for me to understand that. So, as I say, my research has been on community change and health, and to a certain extent, part of that in exercise and other tools that I use to promote good health is stress management. So, but I'm not a burnout researcher. So there are people who have dedicated their whole careers to studying burnout. There's one who is a parental burnout researcher, for example, or like Christine Maslach has been studying burnout for 30 years. So for me, I couldn't claim that I was a burnout researcher because I didn't feel like I was. So when I was meeting with a business coach, she said, can you claim that you're a burnout survivor? If you won't step into saying you're that, because even though I obviously have a lot of experience and knowledge about it, the academic level to me that requires you to be able to claim that term is not what I've invested my career in. So I felt so comfortable saying, I am a burnout survivor. I am someone who has been through burnout, and I am someone who is ongoing managing my burnout. And what I've discovered in this process is the same with the TEDx talk. There's so much power in that personal story. There's so much power in me still struggling to manage burnout. It's not like I'm through the other side and then can say to someone, oh, here's how you do it. It's like, no, is how I'm trying to do it every day as a working mom. So that was such a comfortable space for me to sit in, to say, I'm a survivor, and that really meant something. And I was just listening to another podcast recently where one of the hosts was talking about burnout, and she was sort of saying, yeah, and I've never experienced it. And I suddenly realized that's part of my power, right? That I did experience it and that I went through it. And particularly, I did a webinar this week, and somebody wrote to me afterwards and said, thank you for explaining and being in burnout as somebody who is a giver. Because I think, again, quite often we see the burnout as maybe, someone like the stock market person who's burned out because they're so striving to make this income and, do this thing. And as someone who wants to help other people, and there's so many change agents and advocates out there who do burn out, because if you're overgiving to others, it does lead to burnout. So that's something we have to manage in our tendencies as people pleasers and overgivers. We have to recognize that and manage it. But yeah, it's very part of my personal story. And I also saw, there was one of the leaders in the Levi Strauss company recently wrote about her burnout and how it helped her change her company's approach. And so that's who I'd love to hear from, is companies or leaders of companies who've experienced burnout and use that opportunity to then address burnout differently in their organization.
All right. Very good. Very good. Okay, you can take the website down now. So another thing we're going to discuss here is kind of what are the best ways to combat burnout?
Great. Yeah. So I talk about it in this multi-level way that we approach things from public health. So that's at the individual, interpersonal, institutional, and societal way. So essentially, as an individual, particularly if you're in burnout right now, you have to kind of recognize how severe it is. Do you need mental health help? But the other thing is, what can you do yourself right at this very moment in time to help your burnout? And in particular, getting help from a coach's perspective is so important, because when you're in burnout, you have lost perspective. You've gone from giving to overgiving, thinking to overthinking, driven to overdriven, to overwhelm, and you can't actually understand what's reasonable anymore. So a coach can really help you, give you perspective and permission to do less. But one thing I ask people to sort of really try to do is to stop doing any work that they're doing or volunteering that isn't valued or isn't valuable to them. Because we have to give up something. Something has to stop. And that's really one place we can start. I know for different communities and different populations, it can be hard to say no, because we're expected to be the one that's volunteering and contributing. But we really have to work out how to say no. Sometimes that can also be through doing what I call an impact analysis. Rather than, say, going to your boss and saying, I'm overwhelmed, I can't do this, you go and say, hey, I've looked at all my behaviors and I've taken a very careful impact analysis approach to this. And here's the priorities that I think I should be working on. Do you agree with that? And so that's definitely a different shift. But essentially finding what are reasonable expectations, practicing taking a break. Even as a mother, you have to spend some time away from the kids. You need a break from parenting too. So I really try and give mums permission to do that. And when I did that, I took a week away from the family and my brain started to work again, because I didn't have these 100 tasks of parenting and managing the household on my mind. And so then also unlearning the habits, all these unhealthy habits, emailing 24/7, being available. They're habits that we have to unlearn, and perhaps replacing them with other behaviors that are more healthy. For example, hobbies. And I did improv comedy. That was one hobby that I developed that really helped me. So then at the family level, we really have to have this different way of thinking how we distribute the work in the household. And there are systems like the Fair Play system that can help you do that. As I say, this system described these 100 tasks I just mentioned and really taught you how to split those up. Or in my example was, I didn't necessarily need to split the task, but I did need times where I could take a break. And you have to practice taking a break. It's hard to let go at first. Again, changing parenting style, I became a lot less authoritarian, and that really helped me. And then in the workplace, we really need the conditions of the workplace to change. So that's equitable pay, having active pay and promotion reviews, transparent pay bands, subsidized childcare, hiring and promotion committees that have structured objective criteria and that are analyzed by diverse teams so that we remove the bias. So there's a lot of things really at that structural level in the workplace, but also we need to create psychological safety so people feel comfortable talking about their other roles in life and feel comfortable talking about any mental health issues. So there's a lot of different things we can do. And it's really then a question of, okay, where are companies at and where are individuals at and what are they willing to start? Another one is tracking your yeses and nos. That was a great tool that I started to do. I realized how often I said yes without being asked, how many times I was asked to do new things. And then when I actually wrote down everything I did and then looked at it and said, okay, which am I doing because I really, really believe in them and want to do? Which am I doing out of obligation? And I did. I hung my head in my hands going, goodness, most of my life is spent just doing things out of obligation. So once you start to get a handle on where you're at and what you're doing, that control is empowering. It still takes work to shift how you do those habits, but at least you know where you're starting from.
Excellent, excellent. And speaking of safety in the workplace, how could a person maybe phrase or say that they may be dealing with burnout?
Right, and that can be challenging. So if I step back and try and help you see some of the conditions that can help with psychological safety. So interestingly enough, one of the key conditions is that leaders are vulnerable in the way that I've been vulnerable about my story. So I think that can really help when leaders share their stories of struggles. But I've also seen leaders stand up and share their stories of struggles and say, is anyone else feeling this? And there's crickets because no one feels safe enough to do that. So I think that's really important, is to assess whether it does feel safe. Now, unfortunately, in some situations, and again, this is another harrowing story, but for physicians, for example, they've just started to change the legislation around this. But when physicians needed mental health support, they were afraid of losing their license. And in fact, the reason the legislation has come to change is from the family of Dr. Laura Breen, who died by suicide during the pandemic. She was a physician, and she felt like she was going to lose her license and her job if she admitted the mental health challenges and the burnout she was experiencing in a pandemic where our caregivers had not been prepared to have to lose so many patients and have to struggle so much in their caregiving. So that's changing. Those policies are changing so people can feel safer, and in professions like physicians can feel safer. So that safety is really key to know first. I think the other part is, again, that conversation that you can have around priorities and basically saying what work is most impactful. You know, what is the work that I'm supposed to be doing to contribute most to this organization, getting that role clarity, and then saying, okay, which parts of this are actually valued? Which parts of my job do you as my boss value the most? Because again, when we're doing this undervalued office housework, and unfortunately everyone at the moment, it's about 60% of our time is spent on working out how we work. And so we need to move away from that and be given, for example, you could ask for a meeting-free Friday so that you could actually either get flow with your work and really succeed in getting into something productive. But also the research is showing us that 4-day weeks don't affect productivity. We're equally productive, but that gives people to have an extra personal day that can help with burnout. And so there's lots of different things that you can ask for. As an employee, you could actually ask for subsidized coaching and saying, you know, you wanted to get some professional development. And essentially, any good coach will be also working on your personal development. And if you discuss burnout with a coach, they're going to hopefully help you learn to set boundaries and say no. So those things, those are ways that you can ask for help without necessarily saying, you know, I think I'm experiencing burnout if it's not safe to do so. And again, it's a struggle. It's a challenging word because some people wear burnout as a badge of honor and really underestimate it. And there's definitely been conversations recently because the US Surgeon General has put out a call to action for burnout in healthcare, particularly for nurses. And he described also an example, which I love, of a company who's basically saying, let's get rid of all the stupid stuff we do that we no longer need to do. But essentially, we need to really address this and think about it in a different way so that we can actually change the systems that are creating burnout too.
And as people, how can we sort of tell if someone's actually dealing with burnout?
Great. That's such a great question. How do you spot it? So I actually have a guide on my website that is around 4 ways to spot burnout. So one is in terms of the behaviors you might see. So if you see somebody who previously wouldn't get frustrated by small things, start to get frustrated by small things, that's definitely an indication resentment, rumination. Also, then you could see it if somebody starts to have maladaptive coping behaviors. If you start to see that maybe they're overeating or struggling with alcohol or drugs. So there can be signs like that. When people disengage, when people go quiet, that might also be what you see. And so those are definitely sort of behaviors you can look out for. You can also look for the behaviors they're doing. Are they on their email and responding to emails, in the middle of the night? And so you can see those behaviors. Somebody who isn't able to put down their work, and if you as a leader are role modeling having reasonable work hours, but your employees aren't. So that's really important, because if you don't role model that, but you expect them to have reasonable work hours, but you're not role modeling it, they're not going to do that because they see you're not, and they realize, oh, that's what you value, is the 24/7 worker. So that's definitely part of it as well. So recognizing the behaviors. The second one is to recognize the personality types. So again, our overachievers, our people pleasers, our overgivers, they're all perfectionists. They're all people who are going to struggle with burnout. And again, these are just tendencies that we can mitigate and work on reducing. But also we got to think about that. Those people pleasers and the overgivers are the ones that make our organization function. Our driven, ambitious people are sometimes, the best employees we have. But we have to actually recognize that what they are giving, we are not necessarily giving in return, and to help them set limits on themselves and have really reasonable expectations. And again, that's why the very clear work hours or reduced work days, those things can be really helpful limits for people who are always going to try and overprove themselves. So that's the second way. What are the personalities that tend to be at high risk? And then the third way is, again, to think about the groups that are being automatically devalued and marginalized. And again, you can tell that in your organization by looking at your C-suite and who is in that C-suite. And the chances are it's not going to be women and women of color. So somewhere in your system are barriers to women and women of color rising. So yes, you're definitely going to have devalued and marginalized groups. And those can be from different groups, racially, through gender, through sexual orientation, physical, other types of disabilities as well. Those groups are having to reprove themselves an awful lot, so that they're the ones likely to be burning out. And then the fourth way you can spot burnout is by looking at your organization. As I say, if you've got conditions in your organization that are causing overwork, if you have situations where you're not providing flexibility and autonomy, if you don't have clear roles, if you're not rewarding people equally, if you don't have, for example, paying your employee resource groups, they would be, that demonstrates that you are actually caring about the work people are doing. And so if you don't have those types of conditions, then you can pretty much know that you're likely to be causing burnout in your employees. So that's the hardest one, because that's the introspection at the organizational level that a lot of times people don't want to do because they're busy saying it's your problem, you can't cope with stress. So
if possible right now, I kind of like to run through some of the services that you might provide possibly through your website. So if you could just run through those, I'd be very happy. Great.
Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it. So I think one of the things is my podcast, Overcoming Working Mom Burnout, is there. And I offer solutions to mums, and I interview people with solutions. So that is there. You've also got all my blogs that I write is up there. And so I provide a lot of free resources to help people, and a lot of recommendations, because essentially that's what I want to do. Some of my services there are that I'm a keynote speaker, so I can certainly ignite change in an organization through my keynote speaking. So not only do I have the experiences of something like a TEDx and sharing my personal story, which again can really so many mums wrote to me after my TEDx talk saying, I feel seen for the first time in a long time. So I think a lot of people can resonate that. But I've also done improv comedy and stand-up comedy. So I really try to bring fun analogies to my work. For example, in my TEDx talk, it was a baked Alaska.
I actually watched that one.
Yeah. And then burnout prevention is a big part of what I can do. I can help organizations understand what strategically, where burnout fits, because burnout can be in the middle of all your strategies for wellness, for DEI, and for professional development. If you can solve for burnout in the middle and do it at the individual, organizational, and team levels, that's really where it can have a huge impact on the organization. So that level of strategic planning around burnout prevention. But I also work with an organization called the Human Group with 2 U's, where they bring coaches and psychological safety, emotional intelligence support, and I bring the burnout and the strategic behavioral piece. So the sort of third piece of those services, that is, if you are doing any behavior in the wellness, in the DEI, or professional development space, I can do these behavior change analysis for impact. So like we talked about earlier, what are the behaviors that you're actually changing, and are they the right ones to lead to the outcome you want to? It's like a process of reverse engineering where you're saying, okay, this is where we want to get to. So what are the specific behaviors along the way? So I can make sure that either vendors that you're using are focusing on the right behaviors, or that your internal work is focusing on those behaviors specifically. And then how does change happen? So that's so important to understand, that the process of change requires a time of organizational readiness, preparing for change, making sure you get input from the end user, making sure you're communicating the change purpose clearly, making sure you're setting up, have you got internal champions? Do you have the infrastructure for this change? How does it fit into the workflow? And then the second part of that organizational change process is the change itself. Have you actually got the correct training that people need for the process? Are you actually learning and doing small experiments? Are you starting small? Because that's really key. Is sometimes change can be so overwhelming, and it needs to start small at a sort of experimental level, and then you keep doing iterations of that, but you have to be learning from your mistakes constantly in that process. And then the last part is change celebration. Are you actually recognizing the people and the hard work they've been putting in to change? Are you tracking whether the change is happening, even if it's small and incremental or certain groups at first? Let's really celebrate that that's happening and make sure that feedback is coming back in. So not only, yes, this change is worth it, but we also appreciate the effort you are doing to make this change, because change is hard and it takes a lot of courage. So it needs more support than we actually realize. And then the last part there is, this is the position really that I transitioned into from my academic position, is to help people with grant writing. So that's definitely still part of the income that I depend upon. And I help, as I mentioned, organizations write grants for maternal health or other health issues, because that's still my research and sort of part of my success. But more and more, I want to be able to transition into changing organizations specifically around burnout. But as we know, as all entrepreneurs, we often are having to do multiple roles to ensure an income as we transition in our business goals.
Now, besides all of this work you do, sort of as, a behavior specialist, what are your hobbies and passions?
So, yeah, I'm very passionate about health anyway. So it's a value of mine that I integrate into my whole life. So I'm definitely passionate about running my dog every day, helping my kids have opportunities to exercise. I absolutely love getting out in nature and hiking. If I could hug more trees, I'd be a lot happier. Um, so that's really important to me. And so I also value, for example, home cooking. So that's one of my passions is as well. And again, providing for my family in that way. And I'm really passionate about my kids' growth. So I realized that I spent a lot of time not really knowing how to cope with difficult situations. And English boarding school doesn't exactly inspire emotional intelligence. You're just following the rules, and there's little love in that situation. So I'm really trying to help through my kids' school, which is a charter school where they do social emotional learning. I'm learning from them and for myself about how we as a family can have more emotional intelligence. So that's so important. And again, I'm 50 now and just learning this. So it's been a great growth process for me. But as I mentioned, I also love improv comedy, and I have learned so much from that. And if you like, I can share some of those lessons for what improv comedy can do for a person.
Go on. Go on.
So it's so fascinating because basically the premise of improv comedy is that you work with other people on the stage. So it's always a team approach. And the key is that you say yes and so I use this with my kids all the time. Sometimes when I drag them on a hike, they're getting a bit bored. But then we'll say, okay, what is a party we could create? And it's like, what would you bring to the party? And you never sort of say, no, I don't like that. I don't want that. You're always saying yes and. So all our parties that we imagine would have chocolate fountains and marshmallows and jet skis. You just go as ridiculous as you like. So it's that openness to other people's ideas. You're not negating anything that anyone brings. So everything anyone brings to the improv stage is a gift. And then you decide what to do with it. And if you bring a gift, someone else decides what to do with that. So that's so important because you're learning to let go of control and you're letting somebody else's contribution change the story. And it's so much more amazing when that happens. Also, you have to really listen very actively because you have to listen for the cues. What was it they just said to me? What did they just hand me? Did they hand me a little chick or an elephant? And you have to respond to that in some way. So being very present and having great active listening is so important. Also sharing the stage, I think that's definitely part of it, is that you can't just dominate a whole conversation and you can't control the conversation. So again, that's great team building skills. And then I think making mistakes, because again, sometimes you didn't quite hear what somebody said and you go off on a totally different tangent. And it's like, that's what brings the funny. There are no mistakes. You can't sort of prepare and practice for a situation that's never going to be the same situation again. No one else is going to make that comment. That thought isn't going to come into your head. So it's never going to be the same again. So you just let go of any mistakes that you think might have happened. But it's like unicorns and pixie fairy dust. It's such an amazing experience. And then I think the last part of it, one day I remember being on stage and somebody was dying and they said, sing to me. And oh my goodness, I hate singing. But I was like, okay, I can't know this person. I have to yes and them. So I start blaring out, one of the tunes from Ariel, because my kids had been in that musical. They were doing theater and they'd been singing the songs every day and I'd been listening to them in the car. So I just started belting it out and I said, doesn't matter. I'm terrible at singing. I'm just going to do this thing. And afterwards, people saying to me, my God, how did you pull that out? And I said, oh no, that's my life. I hear this song every day. And so it suddenly made me go, okay, yes, we each come to the stage and nobody else's day is the same as yours. And so that gave me so much confidence going into this burnout work as well, because to be honest, when I left my job as a professor, as I say, top of my field, I lost my identity. My inner critic came out and she was so loud. My inner critic is a witch from Shakespeare's Macbeth. And she is so mean to me. And I had never experienced that. I had been such a confident person. So I lost my identity. I lost a lot of confidence. But realizing through improv that when I stepped onto that stage, I was unique and I brought something different. It really helps me with this burnout work because there's a lot of people working in burnout and as consultants and have businesses. But I realized they're not going to put these things together in the same way as I will because of my experience, my personal experience, my professional experience, and just how my brain puts things together. So it was such an amazing experience. And of course, got me out of the house, got me away from the kids, gave my husband a chance to be the dad he wanted to be without me being there. So many great advantages to that. And yeah, I love it as an outlet.
An outlet. So I'm assuming here it definitely helped you with burnout.
Yeah. It helped me with all these lessons, really, because I'm very reflective about it. I thought about it. So definitely it, because I remember that somebody saying to me, look, if you're not going to work evenings, for goodness sake, go do something in the evenings so that you're not tempted to work, right? So you do have to replace the time with something, because if sitting doing nothing isn't part of your makeup, then yeah, you do need to sort of replace the work time with other behaviors that give you a change, different outlet, different perspective. And I met so many unusual different people there as well. I just really enjoyed that process. And I think that's a really also important part of burnout recovery. Burnout makes you feel very isolated, very alone, and you feel like you're not enough, and you feel like you're to blame. And so part of burnout recovery is actually trying to find other people like yourself who want to do something for others. And that can be a really important part, is not necessarily finding some huge, big purpose, but just finding a way to spend time with people who are really like you. And that is part of the burnout journey, because quite often when you're in burnout, it's because you've been trying to be somebody else. You've been trying to be this perfect mother and perfect worker. And when you actually start to embrace, okay, who am I and what do I actually want to do with my time? Because it's so valuable. Then we answer that in different ways once we've let go of those perfectionist ideals.
Excellent. And what sort of advice would you give to people that are dealing with burnout? How can they overcome this massive struggle?
Right. So it is day by day. It is in very small steps. So the biggest one is, can you get control of your time again? Can you stop giving your time away and start taking it back? Even, for example, for a mom who's burnt out, if she could get a few days away from her family and away from her work, and then actually say, what do you want to eat? And so many mums can't even answer that question. What do you want to do with your time, when you're not actually answering it for everybody else around you? So that's part of it, is you have to get away from the stress that you're experiencing so that your brain can be free to find the right solutions. Definitely getting help is so important. And being comfortable asking for help. That is the first step, is asking for help, whether that's you exchange help, your friends help you, or you pay for help. It's such a key to the process. And so again, then saying, okay, what in my time can I stop doing? Because you have to stop saying yes. So maybe try to say yes only 1 in 10 times, and also to look at everything you're doing and only do 1 out of 7 of the things you're currently doing, and do that one with joy, because you think you're doing well at all these tasks, but more is not better, and working harder is not the answer either, because the working harder gets you into then suppressing your needs. It's not the answer. So yeah, it's really finding ways to start to cut things out. Now, that can be very difficult. If you tell someone to rest, whose self-worth is tied to being productive, I can understand that's a real struggle. But also, if you enjoy as a mom volunteering in your school or something, then again, looking at yourself and saying, I don't, why do I have to give that up? But I think we have to acknowledge sometimes we're in these seasons where we have to focus on ourselves and we have to prioritize our needs. And then when our cup is full, we can go back to a season of being that giver, but hopefully not without the overgiving. That's where we have to learn, when do we tip over into those problematic behaviors? And again, a coach can help you do that. I'm not a coach, but I have been helped so much by them. So.
Okay. Great. Now, this is going to be kind of the last few questions. This has been an amazing interview. I've enjoyed it quite a bit. What are your future plans?
Oh, to change the world still. Yeah, I really want to see differences in how the workplace functions. I want to see differences in what is the ideal worker, what is the ideal mother. I want to see changes in the policies at workplace. I want to see subsidized childcare. I mean, coming from Europe and then I interview people from around the world, they look at the situation here in the US where we don't have paid leave for caregivers, and we hardly have any maternity leave. These things are just expectations in the normal industrialized world that the US is missing out on. And so I know, I've interviewed people who are advocating at the level of Congress for those types of changes and realizing Congress isn't going to change. So really our call is to businesses. If you want to support your employees, then provide them with subsidized coaching, subsidized childcare, paid leave. These are the things that show that you care. And these are the things that will help your employees be healthy and therefore productive for you. So, it is big changes that I want to see. And even this morning, I was speaking with my old head of department, and she's also trying to change her university department. She created a new school of public health, and she's saying we need to change this racist, sexist system. And that's really what is the level of change. It's the system that has to change. Now, systems are people. It's the decisions that people make. So back to how do we change people? And again, it's that we have a collective response, that more and more people are modeling to each other, hey, this is the ideal work. This is the life we want. Hey, these are the boundaries we're going to set, and give each other permission to do that. And really, show support of your colleagues in that way. And so again, that's where we can start to ripple back, because in the way that all these things influence us, and not to make us feel like victims, but acknowledging we are influenced by social norms and institutional policies. But also as we change and we spread that change and we do it out loud, we can have that ripple effect to change things. So I really see it as us being active and loud in asking for these changes and explaining why they're so important. Because again, in my mind, if mums are thriving, society benefits, the world benefits. So
Great.
nothing small. I know, and some people say, well, this is utopia, but it's like, well, we have to have a vision to get to. Because again, as I mentioned, that reverse engineering process, it's like, okay, well, this is where we want to get to. So how do we get there? What are the pieces that we have to unpack and the puzzle that we have to put back together to get there in the end? So in my mind, we do have to have that vision.
Excellent. And are there any, concluding words, last words you'd like to give to sort of the audience now?
Sure. So I understand change is really difficult and it takes courage, but it takes a lot of support. So let's think about that, acknowledging the courage that people have when they change, but giving them as much support as possible in that process. And if it seems overwhelming, some of the things I'm talking about, I have a 4-way of focusing it in again. So for companies, for them to be thinking about providing flexibility, providing focus, being fair, and providing purpose. Those 4 things can really help guide us. And that could be the same in a home, having flexibility, having fairness, and having focus, like really focusing on the things that are so important, and then having purpose in that. Because we do need to know that what we're doing is worthwhile and meaningful. That's what makes change. So fantastic. It's an opportunity. And I know many mums ask me, how am I going to get through this? And will I ever be the same person again? And it does take time. So it's really important to acknowledge that. But there are just steps that we can take, small ones along the way. But sometimes I do miss that super mum that I was. But I don't want to go back to be that super mum, because I realize, on the other side of this, that I'm actually a much better mum when I take time for myself. I'm much calmer. I'm much more patient. So yeah, we do have to sort of let our egos go aside, and that, we can't do it all at the same time. But we can focus on the things that are most important to us. So yeah, that you can get through the other side, and who you're going to be is going to be someone that feels better every day.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Kerr. It's been a privilege.
No, this has been great. Thank you so much for this opportunity and your time and such thoughtful questions. I really appreciate it.
No problem. So just to kind of conclude this, everyone, we're just going to do one quick shout out, and that's to Judy Ryan. She is the CEO of LifeWork Systems. She's our affiliate and collaborative partner. And basically what she does is she works in big businesses and helps to improve their own infrastructure and improve the culture of the workforce. And then next thing, if you look to the upper right corner, that's our YouTube channel. Subscribe now. We're growing more and more in subscribers. So thank you again. And then down below, additionally, we have a Roku channel. This will be on the Roku channel as well as all of our other episodes. So check us out when we get there too as well. All right. I'm Jimbo Paris, and this is the Jimbo Paris Show. Thank you for listening to the Jimbo Paris Show.